Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're not yet subscribed, I'm going to be doing a lot of gouache tutorials, tips, and tricks. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and subscribe. So in this video, I did a bunch of cloud studies in acrylic gouache on rough Arches watercolor paper. And I'll just be going through real quick on each of the steps here. So the first one we did here is wet on wet. So I wet the Arches rough watercolor paper first, and then I did wet paint on top of the surface of the paper while it was still wet. So I outlined the cloud shape with the sky color, and then as I kept going, I wetted the paper over and over again, and I wet the paper to paint in the overall midtones. And the third step is I waited till that was dry, and I used the sky color to refine the outer shape of the clouds. So I just kind of went over the edges and refined them a bit better. And step 4, I refined the outer shape of the clouds again and painted in the tones between the mids and the light tones. And for the last step, I used white paint with as little water in it as possible to paint in the highlights with opaque. And this next one, I used the dry paper and put some wet paint onto it, and I used a brush to draw all the major shapes in. And step 2, I wet the paper and then painted in the next darkest tones. And step 3, I started to paint in the shadows in the clouds. I also went over the sky color again. Step 4, I painted the next darkest tones, then refined the outer cloud edge using that sky color. It's really important to do that to get an overall shape of the clouds. And step 5, I wet the paper, then painted the tones in between the darks and the midtones. In final step, I refined the cloud edge with the sky one more time, then painted in the lightest parts of the clouds using opaque paint. And this is dry on dry, so this is all dry brushing, and I used a brush to paint around the cloud shape. So I'm painting the clouds using a negative shapes of the sky. And then next I painted in the shadow shape of the clouds. So this is all dry brush. And then I painted in the darker tones inside the cloud shapes. So that's going a step darker in value. And then the last step is I painted in the darkest shadow shapes. So this is a good way to get a more painterly look to gouache using dry brush effects. Not so smooth, but a little more energetic and lively. And then this one was opaque clouds on the dry sky. So the first thing you do is paint your sky as a wet wash, as if you're doing watercolor. Next, you wait till that dries, and then you paint the overall shape of the clouds once the sky is dry. We'll refine that soon. Next, you paint the shadows and dark tones of the clouds. So just go back into those dry cloud shapes and paint the shadows into them. And the last step is you refine the cloud outline using the sky color, not the cloud color, and paint the highlights and the wispy clouds. So you do that all opaque. And the last thing is putting it all together. So you outline the cloud shape with the sky color. That's usually the first step in painting clouds. And the next step is you paint the midtones inside the clouds. Step 3, you paint the tones between the midtones and the highlights, and you start to outline the clouds with the sky color. And step 4, you paint the shadows on the undersides of the clouds. So this is a little bit darker of a step down in the cloud shadows. And step 5, you add the highlights and refine the edge of the clouds. So that's a really basic rundown on how I do my clouds, but if you're interested in learning more about how to paint in gouache, I have a whole course on sentientacademy.com, which I will link to below. If you want to learn all about how I paint in gouache, step by step, start to finish, that is a course for you.